Now we're going to go and understand how these ledgers are able to stay private at all with cryptographic functions. And the first method of cryptography that we're going to focus on are hash functions. Hash functions are similar to a code function. A hash function takes in a message and codes it, makes it almost impossible to decipher without the decode function. Um, Hash functions make transactions and sending of information extremely difficult for third parties to decipher, making them extremely secure and trustworthy in an environment where you'll need to communicate with other participants in a ledger. So, for example, if person A were to send a message to person B, that message goes through a hash function, and each unique message will always result in a unique hashed code. As in, if I have two different messages, it's impossible that if those two messages go through the hash function, that the output is the same. The hash function not only codes a message, it also standardizes each message to a certain size, which is 256 bits. And these 256 bits is easily transferable because that's the standard message size of transactions. The three special properties of a hash function I have briefly explained before is one, being computationally efficient. Every message will always hash into a 256-bit output, making the standardization makes the computation a lot easier to compute. A second is collision resistance, which means no two input creates the same output. Every unique input has a unique hashed crypted message. And finally, a cryptographic hash function guarantees that information is hidden. Every bit in the 256 bits of the output is randomized according it's completely randomized. There's no key or Rosetta Stone that will decipher what the hash function outputted unless you specifically have the decode function for that hash function. And I'm going to go into detail with that later. Most decode functions are different per hash function as well. One of the most famous hash functions that are used is one developed by the National Security Agency called the SHA-256. It outputs messages that are always 256 bits. And the algorithm that the NSA created in order to hash a message follows all three properties of hash functions. And they also include an avalanche effect very efficiently. And an avalanche effect is when you have a message, and even if you just change the last letter of that message, the output of that change will be completely different than the output of the original message. This prevents hackers to test what the function does. A hacker can go, if a function isn't, if if it's a naive hash function and it's not that great compared to the SHA-256 function, a hacker can write a message, change one bit of that message, and see if that results in a change in the output. Now, that hacker can use a big computer to do that millions and billions of times and try to find a pattern in the change of the outputs. Now, a good cryptographic hash function will ensure that even though the hacker changed one bit in that message, the output is completely different, as in there is no pattern that can be identified in the outputs. They're all completely randomized. So hash functions help us make sure a message is secure and unreadable from the outside. It also makes it secure from tampering. Now, if hash a hashed message is changed in any certain way, like a bit in the coded message is changed, then the decode function will not be able to read it, which means that the person B who received the message will know that the message has been tampered with. Um, there is no way to tamper a coded message without knowing the decode function and have the decode function rewrite the encrypted message into an output that makes sense. If you tamper a coded message without knowing the hash function, the receiving decode function, um, it's nearly impossible to write something that can be decoded because of the randomization of the decode function um, along with the hash function. So this property helps us not only secure messages through a transaction by making sure no one is able to read it, it also secures these messages in which it makes it impossible for someone to legally change the information in the message as well, whether that be, hacking into a message through Bluetooth signals or and changing the bits somehow. It is impossible to tamper the messages sent. So we could use use this method to make sure that messages saved in a database can also be tamper proof. Each instruction to insert data in a database is, at the end of the day, another message being sent from person A to the database. So when a person inserts a transaction, person A will hash the transaction and send that to the database and send the database a decode function that only the database is allowed to use in order to decode the information that's been sent to be inserted. Since a blockchain is actually a linked chain of data blocks, each block is hashed in a way where the result from the first block is introduced in the hash function of the second block, and the result from that block is introduced to the hash function of the next block. This is so the hash function makes sure that every single block is related to one another. And this is done by a a a block hash, a Merkle root, and a nonce. So the previous hash of the block is actually the hash of the previous hash plus the Merkle root and the nonce together. And that's going to be linked to each block with the previous hash of the previous block. The nonce in cryptography is the number used to protect the message from replay attacks. So it can only be used once in a encrypted message. And a Merkle root is, just as I explained before, a hash of all the previous hashes of the message blocks that are in the entire message. So a message is separated into blocks, and it's a hash of the previous hash of the previous hash of the previous hash of the previous hash until you get to the root of the tree. Okay, so now we've gone over one way of securing a message by not letting it being able to be read by a third party, and then 2, not allowing a message to be tampered with while being stored or sent to the recipient. And now the third security method is to validate the authenticity of a message. Now, say person A sends a message to person B. Person B wants to make sure that that message is actually sent from person A and not sent by a third party using the same hash function and the same decoding hash function. This is done by using digital signature algorithms, and digital signature algorithms tie a identity to a transaction or a message being sent, but it doesn't really have any specific data on person A who is sending the message. It just verifies through a function that it is in fact person A, the person you were expecting to receive the message from, and in this case it's person A. It doesn't identify person A by his or her social security number, or name or account number. And this is done possible by each participant of the ledger having both a public key and a private key. A public key is a decode function that is available to be publicly seen by every single participant in the blockchain. So person A has a public key that person B can see and every third party can also see. Now, person A also has a private key, and that private key is able to crypt a message in a way where it can only be unencrypted by the public key. This way, if person A is able to crypt a message with his or her private key, any recipient or third party can look at the message and verify that with his or her public key by uncrypting the message with the public key. And when it uncrypts correctly, that means that it was sent by person A. There is only the private key, only the public key can uncrypt a private key, and only a private key can be undone by a public key. No private key can be undone with other public keys. And this is how you ensure that the two signatures work together to verify the identity of a sender. Okay, let's put all of these 3 security methods together in one transaction. person A wants to send a message to person B. So person A, number one, needs to make sure that person A's public key is known for all the participants on the blockchain to view. So person B is able to see person A's public key. Now, person A gets ready to send the message. So person A hashes the message block by block with the cryptographic hash function. And then person A signs the hashed blocked message with person A's private key. So person A just uses a private key function on the message that has already been hash functioned over. So now the message is both hashed by block and then crypted by the private key. Now, person A has made it secure to send the message to person B. If a third party intercepts the message, the third party can only verify if the message has been written by person A by using person A's public key. However, the third party who hacked the message will not be able to decipher the cryptographic hash function that reveals what the message was. So, how does a participant generate a private and public key? Well, that is done through a random number generator. Random number generators are written and formulated in a way where it is almost impossible for any deciphering algorithm to predict what the next number is in the random number generator. So the random number generator is pure, like almost purely random. This makes it near impossible for two participants to have two of the same private keys and thus two of the same public keys. One of the most famous functions for creating digital signatures is the ECDSA function used by Bitcoin. It is the elliptical curve digital signature algorithm. And the elliptical curve is defined by a elliptical mathematical function